Greetings, viewers. I think I'm live, although when I check it on YouTube, I'm not seeing it. Maybe refresh the page and see where we're at. I just want to make sure I'm streaming to you before I start talking and saying things and doing things, because if not, then I'm just sitting here talking to myself, and it's funny. They've since changed the setup. I used to do these on Google+, but now I am doing them through Google or YouTube's live streaming, and as a result, things are different, and I have to go through third-party software and make sure everything's all hooked up, and hey, here we are. Looks like we are live. Well, anyway, thank you for watching. Welcome to the show. This is Eric the Car Guy Answers Question Live, I believe 74 this time. And as I said, I used to do these on Google+, and I used to have people post their automotive questions to that, and I've since gone to an AMA type of format. I found that there's only a few AMA questions that get thrown in. Most of them are automotive. I will be taking the questions from my website. There is a link, I believe, yeah, there should be a link in the description of this video. Yes, there is, to the forum discussion about this, but I will say there's already 3 pages of questions posted. The show's originally supposed to be a half an hour, but it's grown beyond that. But even with that, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to work pretty hard to get through all of the questions this time. So I'm going to once again check my audio, make sure that's good. Good. Running these things by yourself is fun. You should try it sometime, because it's a good time for sure. Okay. Now let's just jump in. Oh, and a few things. First, most of the questions I get asked can be answered on the FAQ page of my website. I'm going to post links to that in the description in case I don't get to your question, in case you have questions that don't get posted, that type of thing. But I have gone through great lengths to create a big library of videos and information that can help you through the most common problems I get asked about. I cannot see the questions being posted to YouTube at this time. As I said, I'm taking these off of my forum. Aside from that, I already told you what to do if I don't answer your question, and I just feel like I'm talking and I should be answering some questions. So we're done with the introductions. Oh yes, Oliver in the background. Rear suspension is done. Also the drive belt. I was doing some work on that yesterday, getting that all set up. Since you're watching this, I'm going to drop the air conditioning for now. It's going to save me so much time and effort for now. I do want to do air conditioning eventually, but man, just getting that thing mounted up, and then I got to worry about what's going on inside the car, inside the HVAC assembly. Yeah, but sort of had last week off because I was in Las Vegas with Nokian tires. So we're back to it this week and going to be getting into it tomorrow. But once again, need to get to answer your questions. Also, when I wrap this up, give me a few minutes. I'm going to put links to things that I discuss and talk about during the video, so you don't have to ask about those in the comments. The Blooms asked, I think you said that you composed and played your intro theme. What kind of instruments do you play? Have you ever giggled? Hee hee. There's that answer to that question. As far as the music composed for ETCG1, since Eric the Car Guy doesn't have music at the intro anymore, that was just really something I did with some software. But as far as instruments I play, I've played guitar for years. I can't say I'm good at it. I started it so that I could get to know girls better, and it worked pretty good. But now I'm married, so that's no longer necessary. However, I have moved my guitar into my office and have made a concerted effort to practice regularly, and I've been kind of having fun. I've been, actually, weirdly enough, I've just been playing the riff from Prayer in C for a while. I don't know why, I'm kind of stuck on that right now. Easy, you know, just, anyway. Josh Campbell Hotmail, I guess that's your email address. Do you like Lego minifigs? Never tried them. Can't say I'm even aware that they exist. And right now I'm on a diet, so no. Let's see. CJM89 has been a big fan for a few years. First question. I have a 1993 S10 Blazer 4x4 with a 4.3 liter Vortec and the infamous CFI Spider fuel injection. I have a 305 small block I'd like to swap into that uses TBI. I'm pretty confident of the mounts and physical alterations required. Got the swap book from Summit on the small block S10 Blazer swap, but the computer is what puzzles me. Will swapping the EPROM from the old Camaro, the 305 donor vehicle, take care of the fuel injection system, or will it also affect the transmission system? Camaro has a 700R4, Blazer has a 4L60E. Planning on using the 305 emissions stuff with the Blazer to be in compliance with the smog police. I realize that your expertise is in Honda Acura cars and your current project is a Ford Fairmont, but any suggestions you can offer would be awesome. Thanks for your time and helping us all, and stay dirty. Glenn. Okay. Why not swap everything over from the Camaro into the Blazer? Why not do that? And that way you can just take the harness, the computer, and everything, and really you're just planning the power plant from one vehicle to another. So that way you don't have to worry about, the Blazer's transmission. Although I'm thinking, now that I'm looking at this, that the Blazer could be four-wheel drive, and maybe you want to utilize that. Yeah, that's kind of a tricky one, and I'm not so sure where to go with it. And the stumbling block is, I know the engine's going to run. The stumbling block is going to be the transmission and whether or not that's going to shift properly. That's going to be the tricky part in all this. And I wish I knew the systems better so that I could tell you, yeah, do this, this, and this, but I don't. I believe that's going to be, a doable swap for sure. It'll be tight in there, but people have done it several times, and people put bigger engines than that. So yeah, I wish I could give you some clue on that, and unfortunately I can't, and I apologize, but I'm just not familiar with those GM systems enough with those GM systems to know what to tell you on that. So apologies that I wasn't able to help you. But good luck with that swap. It sounds like some fun. Okay, computer, I know you're streaming video and I'm trying to read things, but come on. Trying to get to the next question and the computer's just acting slow. Okay, finally got it to scroll. The Bidgy. Hello, Eric, longtime fan, first time asker of questions here. I have an intermittent problem with my car's brakes, so sometimes with no real way to predict it, my 1995 Saab 9000 Aero will shake upon applying the brakes. The whole front of the vehicle, including the steering wheel, will shake violently. No ABS light or brake light would come on up on the dash, and it would last for a couple of minutes and then disappear. So after some research, including some of your videos, I decided to take my front calipers apart and service them because why not? Discs were okay, pads too. I cleaned the calipers and relubed the guide pins, which were completely dry with silicone grease, and now the problem seems to have lessened a lot. But it hasn't completely disappeared. The car will still shake upon braking from time to time, but the shaking in the steering wheel has gone. Am I right to think that I fixed something in the front wheel that should probably do the same thing to the rear calipers? Also, the pistons on the front brakes were functional. Still, car brakes are a satisfying manner, but we're full of rust. I could get rid of some of the rust with a wire brush, but the surface is still a bit bumpy and with hard rust spots. Should I worry about that, or do I leave them like that? Okay, I would definitely recommend going to the rear and doing the service that you performed on the front. It's been my experience that rears suffer even more from lack of service, and therefore can cause a problem. And since you state that it doesn't seem to be shaking the front of the vehicle, although you still have issues, that it could very well be that the rear calipers are in as bad, if not worse shape than the front ones by the sound of it. That's just, a good start. Also, you'll be able to lay your eyes on, any potential problems you might see back there. Maybe those rotors are all rusted up, and maybe there's, spots in them that could indicate where the pulsation is coming from. Although an intermittent problem like that is somewhat puzzling because with a hydraulic system, it should happen all the time. But thinking about what you described with your front brakes, with the caliper slide pins being completely dry, if the same is true for the rear, they may not always be moving when you apply the brakes, only sometimes, or very little. So in other words, when the brakes do fully apply, that's when you get the shake. But when you don't get the shake, maybe they're not fully applying. I hope you're following me there. But the point being is I would go to the back and see what you have back there. I also do have a video about diagnosing brake pulsations front or rear. If you have a hand brake, it's relatively easy. It also depends on the style of rear brakes that you have. Some vehicles use the caliper assembly to do to handle the parking brake, and some do not. Some have a very different setup for something like that. So with a drum brake inside of the rear disc. So if that's the case, the method that I show in the video is not going to work, and I believe I described that in the video. But I would start by servicing those rear brakes and see what you can come up with. Let's see, Canuck 90. I first want to say I've learned so much from you. I've only been wrenching in the wrenching business for 6 years, so I'm still learning, but you're a great influence. I'll tell you this, I've been doing this more than 20 years now, and I am also still learning, so that's just kind of part of it. So fear not, you're doing great. My dad just recently acquired a 2001 Civic from our local Honda dealer. It was bought as is, and I have done the work for the safety. Most was straightforward, new brakes, tires, and a few small items, but my troubles right now are the passenger side power window. The number 22 fuse passenger window keeps failing when replaced. The other 3 fuses, the other windows are fine. They all work as normal. Wiring seems fine and the passenger window works if I apply power to it directly. Would you have any idea where to keep looking? Any help is appreciated. Cheers from Canada. How you doing, eh? I don't believe each window is on a separate fuse. I think the first thing to do is to find out what other circuits are on fuse 22. It sounds like you have a short there somewhere, and that's what the fuse is there to do. It's there to protect the circuit in the event of a short, which would be uncontrolled amps just running rampant through the electrical system, which we do not want, which is why we put fuses in there, so when it reaches the specified amperage, it blows the fuse rather than burns up the wiring and perhaps the car. So, therefore, I would be looking around at all the different components that fuse 22 is involved with, and in the process, you could go through a process of elimination similar to what you would do on, say, a parasitic draw situation where you would unplug different components on the affected circuits until the parasitic draw went away. Same would be true for the fuse. Now, you don't want to keep going through fuses all day long. So, what I would suggest, and I'm standing over here just out of frame because I have these things right in my toolbox handy. So rather than sticking a fuse in and having it blow over and over again, this is a circuit breaker. Here's a couple of them. And there are, I don't know if they make them for microfuses or not. What year is it? 2001. So yeah, you'll need, I've made adapters for these to fit in microfuses if you can't find smaller ones. But instead of a fuse, this is a circuit breaker. So this almost sounds like a turn signal when it's in a circuit with a short. So it'll open and close and not harm the circuit, but at the same time it will work like a fuse and you won't have to blow a bunch of fuses. So get yourself one of these guys right here to aid you in your diagnosis, and that should make the process a little bit easier. Just keep unplugging things until this thing stops clicking. Then you know the affected circuit, and then you're going to have to chase the wiring. Voltage drops are a good way to do this, to try to find out where that amperage is going. And once you do that, you will likely find the issue. And it could be just from personal experience, take a look at the harness that goes between the door and the body on the inside where the door opens up. That's an area where the wiring goes back and forth quite a bit. There could be a couple of wires in there that have chafed and are now touching together, which would cause a short similar to what I just described. And I hope that information can help you track that down. B-Plat89 has, Eric, big fan of your show since the beginning. I'm excited to hear Oliver start up for the first time. Me too. It's been like forever since I've been working on this car, but you know. The next things are, once I get the accessories done, fitting the radiator in there, mounting the power steering cooler, then the engine and transmission are all coming back out. I'm going to swap the K-member and the front suspension. I'm also going to take the interior out and do the wiring and the dash and my gauges and all that stuff. So we've got a long ways to go. And I'm entertaining a roll cage as well. All right, anyway, I'm sorry, I completely got off track there. My question is, do you have experience with aftermarket remote starting systems? I've heard they mess with your ignition system. I've heard they're a waste of money. I've also heard that they're the best thing they've ever invested in. I've been thinking about putting one in my truck. I don't know if it's worth the money. Any tips would help. Thank you. Remember to stay dirty. P.S. My apologies for posting 2 questions. I couldn't figure out how to delete one of them. I'm only going to answer one question because, like I said, there's a lot of people asking, so I'm just going to address this one on the remote starter. I saw you posted another one after this. Okay, I am personally not a fan of remote starters Why? Because as a technician, I see them when they're broken. I see vehicles come in with remote starters and they just destroyed the wiring harness and completely cheesed up the whole system, and removing said remote starter seems to cure the problem. So that's when I see them. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't hundreds of them out there that I have not seen because they were installed correctly and they work correctly. Now, if you're in a cold climate, I understand that, you don't want to get in that vehicle first thing in the morning when it's like 5 below and start it up. You'd rather sit there, look out the front window and push the button and know that your vehicle is started up and will be nice and toasty when you jump in and go on your way to work. I get it. So, like I said, my personal opinion is not so great, but I see them when they're broken. And there are probably many out there that aren't broken. So it's really up to you if you want to go down that road, but look for a reputable place. I mean, in this day and age, you can look up an installation store long before you ever go in, check out the reviews and see how good they are, see what other people are saying about it. And if you find a place with a good reputation and people that know what they're doing, it's probably going to be just fine. And then it's going to be a matter of the brand of remote starter that you get, because that can also fail. So even if you do get one and it's working and wired in properly, there is the possibility that it breaks down the road. And say, for instance, it's causing your vehicle not to start for some reason. Well, if you take it in someplace to have them diagnose that, the first place they're going to go is for that remote starter, and it will probably cost you extra time at that time. So just be prepared for that. But in the end, that is completely and totally your choice how you choose to go about that. Okay, like I said, you posted 2 questions, but I'm only going to address the one. DM3105, sorry that I couldn't be, sorry for what could be a really long question. I have a 1994 Oldsmobile 98 Regency with 3.8 liter with 175K on it. I have a few months back after a trip, it threw 3 codes at a time, PO321 and PO1361. The car idled fine, but when you drove it, it was overall cruddy. Once at highway speeds, it was in overdrive. It would shake and sputter. It would hesitate at acceleration, but would idle fine. If you could find ways to get the engine light off, it would drive perfectly fine. The codes only popped up once the engine was started and never while driving. A trick I got to get from point A to point B with no engine light was I would start the engine, and the instant the engine was started, I'd shut it back off and start it again. This would get rid of the engine light and the car would drive fine until I shut it off and restarted it again. A friend of mine owes me one, so he changed my crank sensor, which had no effect, and then changed out the entire ICM with new coils, which got rid of the engine light, and the car drove fine for a few days. Yesterday I went to start it, and the engine light was back on, and I did my trick, and it went off, and I have not seen it since. I was leaning toward a bad PCM, since these older GMs, 94 to 95s, I know had PCM issues, and when they did, they would usually throw these 2 codes. Just curious of your opinion on it. Thanks so much and love your videos. Yes, I actually go back this far. When I first started working in the field, I would run into these quite often. And whenever we would have ignition system problems on GMs of this vintage, we'd replace the whole kit and caboodle. So if we got a code for a crank sensor, we replace the crank sensor, the module, and the coils, because we often found ourselves going back in and doing it again. If not, on that engine, I believe it's up on the back of the engine block, and it's in a very warm area, and electronics don't like to get hot like that, whatever. But anyway, we replaced the whole thing, and it sounds like you've already done that. So you've pretty much covered the ignition system. And I did a little bit of research on these codes, and I believe I agree with you as far as it being a PCM problem based on that. However, you can't rule out wiring and everything else, but if you can pick up one at a relatively decent price, 94, you're not going to have to worry about any kind of chipping keys or any of that kind of thing. So it may be worth a try. To try out a PCM, and I say this based on the fact that you're able to get rid of it by tricking the system, turning it off and back on. If it was there all the time, I would say, well, there's probably some ignition system problem, but it acts like a logic problem, and the computer's in control of that. And when I say logic problem, I mean that kind of consistent failure, and the way you describe it sounds like something the computer isn't doing right. So that could be the result of, once again, faulty wiring or a faulty connection somewhere. So this could all be all for naught. So before you go sinking a bunch of money in, and probably lay your eyes on the engine harness and see if there's anything that looks damaged, shaped, or could possibly be the cause of a problem. And if you can't find anything, give the computer a try and see what happens. Speeding Cheetah has a cool avatar too. Why is that many repair shops, even some well-known chain shops, when you have work done on your vehicle, that none of it shows up on Carfax or other reporting services? I have a buddy of mine that is selling a car, and he just dealt with a buyer who claimed that since the maintenance was not on Carfax, it was not done by a reputable and licensed mechanic who would have been required to report any maintenance done to a vehicle. You would want the info to show up on these reporting sites for best resaleability, etc., wouldn't you? Also, one of the key things people searching for a used car to go to buy these days. Okay, is there a better online source than Carfax for detailed history and info on a used vehicle? So basically your question revolves around Carfax, which I think it's actually Carfax. And I believe the only thing that gets reported would be collision issues. I don't know if they go through maintenance and vehicle history. At least none that I know of. I know of Carfax, and that's something that talks about any body shop repairs that were in the past. But I've actually done, in fact, right on this website that you posted this to, on the FAQ page, there's an entire section on purchasing a used vehicle. And in the videos, in that section, I clearly state that Carfax is completely useless because if somebody doesn't report an issue, then it doesn't show up, and it never will. And the best thing to do if you don't inspect the vehicle yourself is take the vehicle to a reputable mechanic, perhaps someone you know, to look the vehicle over before you purchase. That is imperative you do that, because the reason why I went through the trouble to make all that stuff about used cars, because there have been hundreds of times I can think about in my career where a customer has bought me a vehicle that they just purchased, as is no warranty oftentimes, that has major problems that were not discovered at the time of purchase. And now that they purchased it, perhaps they're past the 30-day mark and they're not able to return it and they're stuck. So the best thing you can do whenever purchasing a new used vehicle is to have it inspected ahead of time or buy it certified used, which means that the people you bought it from are already on the hook for any repairs because they've gone over it, they've checked it over, and they've certified it as something that is going to be mechanically sound. So pay no attention to any of that. It's useless in my opinion. The only thing that's worth anything is the eyeballs of an experienced person looking at the vehicle and letting you know the potential problems. And even better if you can find somebody who knows that particular make and model. For instance, if you wanted to know something about an Acura or Honda you wish to purchase, bring it to me, because I've been working on Acuras and Hondas for 20 some years now, and I know pretty much those systems in and out. But if you brought me, say, a Saab or a Mercedes, I could do a general inspection, but I wouldn't necessarily be as privy to those common issues that may pop up with those vehicles, places to look that you wouldn't necessarily think to look if you were just generally looking a vehicle over. So check out the FAQ section on the website, and that will give you those videos and the other information. Detailed information about how to inspect a vehicle for a used car purchase. All right, Fred's my, wait a minute, Fred's my, Fred Smith, I mispronounced names, I should have mentioned that earlier. Anyway, moving on, 96 Ford Thunderbird with 4.6 liter engine. The car had some freon leaks in the AC system. I replaced the high and low pressure lines, dryer accumulator, orifice tube, compressor. I charged the AC system, but I'm getting some weird pressure readings from the manifold gauge. AC on, normal setting, 60 psi, low side, 340 high side. AC on max setting, 58 psi high side, or low side, 330 psi high side. AC off, 120 low side, 140 high side. All these pressures seem to be too high. Temps coming out of the vents were around 55 degrees. Also, the AC compressor did not cycle on and off. The clutch would just stay engaged while the AC system was turned on. When I added the first can of Freon, the compressor did cycle on and off. Possibly the result of the system was low on Freon and it hadn't been fully charged yet. I was working on the car in a city located in the Southern California desert, so the outside temperature was around 105 degrees. Would a high ambient temperature cause higher than normal AC pressure readings? Also, would the hot weather cause the AC compressor to constantly be engaged when the AC system is on? Are there any other AC system components I should look at and see why the system pressure is so high? Thanks. All right, you did mention some key things with AC, and I say this all the time. You know, as far as DIY and AC, to me, those things don't really go together. Even experienced technicians can falter when it comes to AC because there's so many things. You didn't mention anything about evacuating the system before charging. You didn't mention anything about how much you charge the system. The system itself could be overcharged. The system could have moisture in it. The system could have air in it. It could have all of these things. You didn't mention the proper steps in order to charge the system, and not knowing that, it's really difficult to say what position you're in or what is exactly causing it, but you're absolutely correct, and these pressures seem high. Now, higher ambient temperatures, yes. Yeah, I would expect to see higher pressures, especially on the high side, but those seem excessively high to me. They should be down probably about 20-40 psi from where they are now, especially the low side, even on the warmest day. And also it's humidity that's going to play more of a factor than anything else. Heat itself is yes, that's a load on the system, but humidity even more so. And if you're in the desert, you're not going to get a lot of humidity, so you get a lot of heat. So I would expect you to get better performance out of that, but not knowing what you did to the rest of the system, I can't help. But once again, over in the FAQ section, there's an entire section on HVAC, how to properly charge, how to diagnose, how to performance test, how to do all these things that could possibly lead you to a solution to that problem. Small block 318, I can read that. Hey Eric, just signed up to the website, 94 Dodge Dakota 4x4 with a 318 5-speed manual. This is my first vehicle. I really love the darn thing. The entire driveline is in great shape, despite having 204,000 miles. The same cannot be said for the frame, however. It's just about rusted in half. Here's my idea. Find another Dakota from around the same time period with a good body, solid frame, and swap the engine and transmission into it. Here's the thing. All the Dakotas I've found are automatics. How hard is it to convert from auto to manual? I've done some reading and it doesn't sound that hard. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. Also, this is probably a dumb question, but do you know if the engine and transmission can be pulled out together or if it has to be removed separately? And is it safe to lift the engine by the intake? Some people say not, and some people say they do it all the time. Thanks. Okay, I think first you need a dose of realism. You got a frame that's rotted in half. Okay, I get it. And you actually love the truck and you want to keep the dream alive. I totally understand. But the kind of effort that you're talking about going through for an engine and transmission that already has 204,000 miles on it seems excessive to me. Now, this coming from a guy who's building a hot rod of a 1979 Ford Fairmont. Yes, I'm not the first person to think of it and do it, but the point is, it's not exactly practical. Your swap that you're talking about, in my opinion, isn't necessarily practical either. Why not just get another truck? And just another truck completely, and you're done. I mean, you're not going to save any money by spending all that time and effort doing what you're talking about doing. You're not going to save anything. You'll probably have fun doing it. You'll know it in and out. You'll have the satisfaction that you have done something on that scale. But the potential for failure, very high. And especially with the engine. So if you're going to pull the engine out, and it's got that many miles on it, and you're going to have it out anyway, well, then it's time to do a rebuild. Well, then what about the transmission? Oh, yeah, well, why not that? And then you get the new vehicle, and then you've got a whole host of whatever problems go along with the new vehicle, and you're like, well, you know, before you know it, you could have bought something practically brand new. For the money I've got in Oliver, I could be driving something brand new right now. But that's not what I want. Okay, so if this is something you absolutely want, then go for it. But think about it practically. And also, if this is your daily driver, don't do it. You'll need another vehicle to drive while you do all this work because you're not going to get that done in a weekend. I'll tell you that right now. Automatic to manual swaps. It's not so easy these days. On a 94, it's easier, but the newer the vehicle, the more difficult it's going to be because they have to have the ECU, the wiring harness, and everything to go together. And if they don't run. So really, do some soul searching. Decide if that's what's right for you. Or fire up Craigslist and see if there's some other vehicle out there that you can equally fall in love with and move on. And I just hate to put it that way. Maybe you can, save the engine and transmission and scrap the rest. And maybe someday you can put that into something else, if you just want that experience. But if you're talking about doing what you're doing, well, I'm concerned that you're going to end up behind the 8-ball and walking. All right, Marius Montaneu. Once again, I suck at names. Anyway, earlier this summer, I had asked you a few questions about rebuilding my brake system. In the end, I decided to do the caliper overhaul as well. All in all, went well, no leaks, brake pedal feels great. Here's some pictures of the results. So this isn't necessarily a question. This is just somebody showing us pictures of the work that they did, which looks really good. Congratulations on the work that you did. Ooh, painted the calipers all red. Isn't that special? Red means stop. No, seriously, good work. And I see you use copper lines as well. Hudsomark 17, 2004 Toyota Corolla. There's a scraping noise coming from the front right wheel only when the brakes are applied. I assume the pads were worn, but upon inspection I still have plenty of material left and the indicator is nowhere near rubbing the rotor. Any ideas of what could be causing this? Love your channel, have watched it for almost 3 years now. Still haven't made it to the meetup. Hoping 2017 will be the year. 2017, should have said. Thank you for everything you do, Mark H. Okay. Noises when braking. To me, that warrants an inspection, which it sounds like you did, but when I say inspection, I mean take the caliper apart and look inside. There could be some piece of debris that's lodged in there. I've seen this happen. Or possibly the splash shield maybe coming into contact. Sometimes it happens actually more on turns than when braking. That's usually the way I would go about finding something like that. Sometimes you can put it up on jack stands and run it on jack stands and have a buddy like apply the brakes while you're under there listening. Obviously be careful. You don't need to do this at high speed. I don't believe, if you're looking for a noise. But I would start by servicing the front calipers, meaning that I would take everything apart, lubricate the slide pins with silicone paste. It's on this website on the tools page if you can't find it. I'll also link it in the description. But yeah, go through, do a general service on the brakes and see if there's like a pebble or something that falls out when you remove those brake pads. Or if there's some other issue that might be there that you might be able to find, like a dry slide pin that could be causing it to hang up in such a way. You can't truly see what's going on until you get it apart. I would also inspect the rear brakes. Many times, I've been burned by this before. Somebody brought me a vehicle once. They said, oh yeah, I've got this problem with a wheel bearing. And I know it's my front wheel bearing, so I checked both front wheel bearings. They're fine. And I was ready to ship it, and one of the other technicians came over and said, did you check the rear? And I was like, no, and I went back, and sure enough, one of those rear wheels had a very bad wheel bearing. So take it with a grain of salt, check all four wheels whenever you have a noise, because something might sound to be on one wheel, but it could be on another. Ryan S. has a 90 Prelude with an intermittent chirping sound like a metallic chirp. It just sounds like birds under the hoods. It seems to happen only when it's cooler outside. I noticed at night with the ignition on, it chirps for a few seconds. The lights dim a bit, and then when the sound stops, the lights get bright again. I suspect alternator. Can alternator bearings make this intermittent chirping noise? Tried squirting penetrating oil on the shaft, hoping it would soak in, but no luck. What say you? Oh, great one. Thanks. No need for such compliments. Anyway. Okay. Yeah, with this. Why not check the tension on the belts to start with? It sounds like it might be alternator belt and not necessarily the alternator. So before you go spending lots of money on an alternator, why not check the belt tension? If it's a little loose or the belt itself is dry rotted, it might not be a bad idea to replace that before you go and buy an expensive alternator. Belts are a lot cheaper than alternators. So that's what I recommend you do. It sounds like it might be a belt thing, but it might not. So, but a 90 Prelude uses separate belts for everything. They don't have a serpentine belt set up on that, so you don't necessarily have to worry about, well, on the AC you have to worry about a tensioner, but on the rest you don't. But I would check the belts themselves and also their condition. So how tight they are and what kind of condition that they're in. And if you find they're all dry rotted and cracked, just as an FYI, whenever I do a timing belt water pump, and it's common practice when people do timing belts and water pump that you replace the drive belts, mainly because you're having to remove them to get to the timing belt anyway. So it stands to reason that if you find old drive belts, that it's a good possibility that your timing belt is also equally old. And if that's the case, on a vehicle like that, you want to address it sooner, or you want to address it before it becomes a problem. So in other words, if you find that you have old dry rotted belts, then I would suggest you also replace the timing belt and water pump in addition to that. And you said that was a 90. Depending upon what engine is in it, you might be able to use the F-Series V manual that I have on the website. That can walk you through the process of replacing that. But they put all different kinds of engines and preludes. And in fact, the 90, it could also, would it have a B series? Might be a little new for a B series. Hard to say. It could just be a 2-liter. Difficult to say. Like I say, they put everything in preludes. Anyway, so if you find old belts, probably not a bad idea to do the timing belt water pump too. Evil Eye. What are your thoughts on using starter fluid when troubleshooting? I ask because the use of starter fluid is often recommended on the forum. I was taught that starter fluid is an aggressive solvent and will wash the oil film off the cylinder walls, resulting in dry cranking and accelerated engine wear when the engine won't start. I've heard that it can cause several thousand miles worth of engine wear in a few seconds. It's highly flammable and expands enormously, which can have disastrous results if the engine backfires through the intake. As far as I know, starter fluid was originally meant to be an emergency starting aid for big rig diesels, so poor trucker delivering your beans and toilet paper wouldn't freeze to death on a lonely winter road when his truck was being cranky. Personally, I don't use it. There are better and safer ways to see if an engine has fuel and spark. Your thoughts? Well, I agree. And when you say using starting fluid when troubleshooting, if an engine isn't starting, I do not reach for starting fluid first thing. And I really avoid it on newer vehicles, especially. Old carbureted vehicles, yeah, all right, well, that's fine. But especially on newer vehicles, as you said, it's extremely flammable. It could be disastrous, as you point out. It's in essence ether, from what I understand, which, as you said, is extremely flammable. At first, when I read your comment, I was thinking, okay, what is he talking about? Looking for vacuum leaks? Last thing I want to spray on my engine is starting fluid looking for vacuum leaks. That's a surefire way to start a fire on a hot engine, like right out of the gate. But as far as diagnosing a no-start condition, no, the starting fluid is not the first thing to do. I check for spark first. It's the easiest thing to do. You know, just pull a plug wire, if it has plug wires, or pull a coil pack out, or what have you, and try to, hold it next to a ground and see if you got a spark. That's the first thing I do. If I don't have spark, I know where to go next. If I do have spark, well, then I check fuel delivery. In modern vehicles, fuel pumps. So you can easily stick your ear back by the fuel tank, turn the key on, and listen to hear a buzzing noise, a humming noise. If you don't hear that, the fuel pump's not coming on. Maybe bang on the gas tank a couple of times, and then if you hear it, well, then you know you very likely have a problem with the fuel pump. It's kind of a GM fuel pump diagnosis 101 I just gave you there. But starting fluid is nowhere in that troubleshooting tree of diagnostics. In fact, I have an entire section, as you know, because Evil Eye, I know you've been on the site for a while, and I thank you for that. I have an entire section on diagnosing no-start things. So the next time somebody's having that kind of issue, send them on over to the no-start article, and that should walk them through the process, at least the process I go through whenever I'm dealing with a no-start condition. But I agree. I don't use starting fluid as a diagnostic aid at all. That doesn't, to me, no. That's not what I go for if a vehicle's not starting. It's kind of, like you said, it could be dangerous. All right. Olin and Kate. Aw, they look like a cute couple in their avatar. As a 2008 Chevy Silverado that I recently flushed the brake fluid on. Sadly, I didn't heed your constant warnings and advice to not let the master cylinder run dry. Long story short, all 4 quarts of brake fluid later, the system doesn't have air bubbles at the bleeder valves, but the pedal is still spongy. Some people have mentioned that I have to go to the dealer to get a scanner to cycle the ABS system, which I have almost succumbed to that idea. Oh, what ideas do you have? Well, first thing I would try, and you're probably going to have to get the ABS bled out with a scan tool. Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to go to the dealer. Good scan tools at reputable repair shops can often accomplish the exact same thing. So General Motors is general, and it's much easier to find scan tools that will talk to domestic vehicles than it will be to import vehicles. And when I'm saying this, I'm speaking from America, which is where I am and broadcasting the show from. If you're in other parts of the country, obviously it's not going to work out the same for you anyway. It may come to that, but one of the things I do with a Spongy pedal after a brake job is I go into a parking lot and cycle the ABS myself. Find a deserted parking lot, take it up to as much speed as I dare, and slam on the brakes several times. And this activates the ABS. It also does what I call resetting the master cylinder, because if you're bleeding brakes, you are going the full travel of the master cylinder, which is something it rarely ever does. And this can be dangerous on some older vehicles, because the bore, all it is inside the master cylinder, it's basically a hole. And there's a piston that goes on the inside of it that actually has two different seals on the inside of it. So when you depress the brake pedal, those seals force the fluid through those ports in the master cylinder. Well, and they're used to only moving here. But when you're bleeding brakes, they move all the way to their full travel. And if there's corrosion in the bore of that master cylinder, it can tear those seals up. And next thing you know, you're replacing a master cylinder after that. Now, I'm not saying your 2008 Silverado has this problem. What I'm saying is it's something the system isn't necessarily used to. And I find, and I call this resetting the master cylinder, is that the pedal will travel a certain amount whenever you apply the brakes. Now, after you've done all this work, it may apply at a much lower place inside of the master cylinder. And when you slam on the brakes, not only do you activate the ABS, but those are cup seals inside that master cylinder. So the harder you push on them, the more they seal, the more they're forced against the inside of that master cylinder bore. And as a result, they sit up further back up inside the master cylinder. This has just been my experience, all theory, all speculation, but just something to try before you head to, well, like I said, you don't necessarily have to head to the dealer. You can call up local repair shops and say, hey, do you have a scan tool that can activate ABS? Most of them do. And therefore, you may be able to complete that bleeding process. But I would try jamming on the brakes in a parking lot a couple of times first. I even did a video about this, which is also included in the FAQ about brakes, right here on this website. The Bukes. Love the show, as always. And the new streams from the shop, hey, I like them too. I like being here at the shop. I just like hanging out here. I also love watching Oliver being rebuilt. I love rebuilding Oliver, but like many have pointed out, I want to drive it. Anyway, he has a 2005 WL Holden Statesman. Yes, I'm an Australian. I love my land yacht. So in other words, here in the States, it's what looks like a Caprice Classic, which is kind of our equivalent there, because I believe Holden and GM are kind of the same thing. In fact, I got a Holden badge right there on my toolbox too. Anyway, loves his land yacht. It has an LS1 5.7 liter in it, and he loves it. It uses 5W40 full synthetic oil, and it runs like a dream, but it has started to develop some lifter noise. Any suggestions on how to quiet them? As always, thanks. Okay, I don't know about Australia as far as engine oil weights, but engine oil weight is critical to the lifters because they're further up in the oiling system. The bottom end of the engine gets oiled first, lifters get oiled second. So when people come to me and they say, I want to run thicker weight in my vehicle, thicker weight oil in my vehicle, my engine, because it's starting to make noise. To me, that's counterintuitive because the thicker weight oil is going to take longer to reach those areas that are probably making noise, thus accelerating the wear. Some people, swear by it and all that kind of thing. It's not something I necessarily subscribe to. But if you're starting to have lift noise, it depends on what's causing the lift noise, if the lifter is collapsed or if it's just old and it's worn out. If it's old, it's worn out, it's got to be replaced. But here's the thing, you can't just replace lifters. You have to replace a cam and lifters as a set. And if you don't, then you can accelerate the wear on the camshaft considerably, making the lobes just completely, totally round. So, I've heard of people doing it, just dropping lifters in, and who knows what happened after that, but I was always told that was a no-no. You don't want to just drop lifters in. It has to go along with the cam. Lucky for you, the LS platform is highly prevalent, and you can very easily find parts for it. So, I'm sure you can maybe do a performance upgrade while you're in there. The cam has everything to do with how the engine runs. I'm just saying. I guess what you could do is you could just put it up with it until you can't put up with it anymore, and then resign yourself to replace the cam and lifters. That's kind of what I would advise you if you came to me with that, and I could verify that that was the problem. I don't advise using thicker weight oil because I think that's got a diminishing return. Cavs fan has a 2000 Honda Civic. The TCC is going in and out of lockup. When this happens, the D4 light flashes randomly and the RPM gauge fluctuates by about 400 RPM. I tried a different solenoid and it didn't change anything. Also, I did test both the original and new and used solenoid. I tried a used ECU and it didn't help. I cleaned the throttle body and it seemed to help. After that, it would go away for 3 or 4 days and then come back after a couple of days. I recently got some fuel lines replaced, and after that it went away for about a week. Now it's back and doing it every day. Also, when you shut the car off for a second, it will go away for a while. I have cleaned every electrical connection that I can see under the car. Thanks. Well, Cavs fan, you obviously didn't read the entire article I wrote, and some of it specifically on Honda idle issues. My first question to you is, how do you know the TCC is going in and out of lockup? How do you know that that is what's causing your idle to fluctuate? You don't. You've replaced a bunch of parts and kind of crossed your fingers hoping that you'd have a result. And you're not exactly addressing the problem, which is the idle. So if you have a D4 light that's flashing, pull the code for the D4 and find out what it is before you start replacing solenoids, because it could be for any number of transmission issues that could have nothing to do with the torque converter clutch. And that could be completely separate from what's happening with your idle. Number one cause of idle problems on Hondas, low coolant level. Yes, for real. Because the idle air control valve doesn't have the coolant in there, and the coolant temperature sensor gets little pockets of air passing past it, and it gets fooled. And it can't decide where to set the idle, so it fluctuates up and down. You shut the car off and turn it back on, you could get rid of that air bubble for a second. It's written out clearly in that section on idle problems, and there's some specific to Honda idle problems. So when you diagnose something, look at the facts. Don't guess, don't speculate, don't anything until you have the facts. And you go about it step by step. And the first thing to check for in that Honda idle article is for air in the cooling system. And there's a video there about how to bleed that air out. Once you've done that and you know you have no air in the system, recheck the idle. If the idle's good, great. If not, the next thing to do is to check for vacuum leaks. If you find vacuum leaks, repair those vacuum leaks and then recheck. And then if you still have a problem from there, let's see, a 2000 Honda Civic that doesn't have a fast idle valve, so you don't have to worry about that. Sometimes cleaning the idle air control valve can help, but it sounds like you may have already attempted that or tried that or whatever. So you're probably fine there. But, what was the other thing? I can't remember. So yeah, it was air in the cooling system. Oh, yes, if somebody adjusted the idle screw on the throttle body, if somebody did that in an attempt to try and fix the idle, they probably screwed it all up, because that should never be touched. So if you see that screw, don't touch it. That's the reason they put wax on the outside of it, so that it doesn't get moved. It should never be moved. There's a procedure that you need to go through in order to set the idle properly, and that's start the engine up, unplug the idle air control valve, and set it to the proper RPM, and then you plug it back in. Because in essence, when somebody tries to adjust that screw, they're creating a vacuum leak, when really they're masking the problem. So you got some work ahead of you, and I suggest you study the section on Honda idle problems and then come back to it. And then as far as your torque converter clutch, I've got a thing written up on transmission problems that could also be helpful to you. So go there next. All right, let's see. We have several more since I started. But I'm going to wrap up with this. Schwieberter. I'm laughing at myself because I completely suck at pronouncing names sometimes. Dyslexia or something like that. Words sometimes baffle me. Anyhow, oh yeah, and the battery on my mic is about to die too. So before I completely lose audio, and I'm going to hold this up and keep an eye on it before it actually goes away, I'm just going to summarize because I read this earlier, but one of the things he was asking about was he's the one that was asking about the Range Rover in the last, or Land Rover, I'm sorry, in the last show, and trying to find correct tires. And actually some of you yelled at me for not knowing about how tires were measured, and I'm sorry about that, even though I did a video about it. Too much stuff in my head, some of it spills out. Anyway, he solved the problem by getting a set of LT235/85R16s. But the next thing he wants to know, and actually asks several questions. Main question is about a Ford alternator. It's a 2003 Ford Taurus, and my friend was scrapping. I want to install it on my Land Rover as part of the auxiliary power circuit because he doesn't have a radio phone. However, the unit is PCM controlled. I believe 3 wires plugged into the voltage regulator. Is this control signal from the PCM to the alternator, blah, blah, blah. In other words, he wants to, what I believe, it's a 61, so it has a divorced voltage regulator. So it's a separate voltage regulator, but newer alternators have a voltage regulator inside the alternator itself. I'm going to link a video for you that sort of shows how to do it on a GM system. As far as a Ford system, I'm not as familiar with those, but the computer controlled is just the computer controlling it to try to make it more efficient. But alternators pretty much work the same way. They need to know the voltage in the system, and they need to know when the ignition is on. And in essence, it's not that difficult because they just need a voltage feed from the ignition. They also need a voltage feed from the alternator/battery anyway, so that it knows what it's putting out, so they can regulate the field. So that's what you need to look into. You need to find a diagram for the alternator you're using. Once you've found that, you can use that to sort of wire it and not worry about the computer. I don't think you're going to have to worry about the computer, or you can get a separate type of alternator anyway. So once again, my microphone is about to die here. So before I go replacing any parts with it, or any batteries in it, I'm gonna just close this out since we're pretty much almost to an hour anyhow. So if I didn't get to your question today, I apologize, but I will be doing this again in 2 weeks. Let's see what day. That is gonna be the 12th, it looks like. So the 12th of October will be the next live show that I'm going to do as well. Same deal, I'll post it to my website the day of on the 12th, and you can go, and obviously the earlier you post the question, the better, and I will work my hardest to get to that question before everything ends. Now, last time I did this, I closed out the YouTube video. I had to wait a few seconds because there's a delay between what's coming out of my computer and what's going up to YouTube. So I may just let it run for a minute after I close this out, so don't be weirded out by that. But anyway, I want to thank you for watching. Thanks to everyone for posting your questions. I will do my best to get that description written up with as many of those links and things that I mentioned. I'm also going to put a link to that FAQ page. And also for those of you that have automotive questions that I haven't covered at all here, you can go there, EricTheCarGuy.com. We worked very hard on making it a place that was easy for you to use. And you can post your questions to the forum when I'm not there. So anyhow, I'm going to cut this off. I'll Google+, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram if you wish to connect with me socially. I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, stay dirty. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. There was a button here for fade out. Oh well. See ya.